Steve Melendez, and I was the producer of the film, along with David Connell in New York, who worked for the Children's Television Workshop. They're the people that produced Sesame Street. And anyway, I got involved in it because CTW had a contract with a company who pulled out. They decided they didn't want to do it. And so they were desperately running around trying to find some studio who could do a 2-hour TV show for them in what was essentially 9 months. And eventually they came to us, went to Bill in Los Angeles. And he said the only way he could do it was in the London office. He called me, and I said, no, the only way I could do it is bringing other studios in, because we just didn't have the capacity to turn out this amount of work. And so that's what happened. We had 2 studios in London and 1 studio in Barcelona, and of course a studio in Los Angeles. And a logistical nightmare, keeping all this together. And I was flying back and forth from London to Los Angeles to New York and Barcelona. Bill was doing the same, and he and I sometimes would just cross and wave at each other, in airplanes, but just trying to get this thing done in time. And it was, it worked out fairly well, considering, and we had a lot of problems, particularly with the communications, because it takes a long time to learn to talk to somebody on the telephone. And that idea that you say blue and they hear red. And this happens all the time. And it takes a while to do that. That's why the flying, physically going back and forth. CTW had originally contracted to a studio to do the work. And this studio, they were working on the design, and they just could not get it right. And I assume, I don't really know the full story, but that there were some arguments between them. And finally, this other studio resigned it. And so having had like 2.5 years to do this thing, they suddenly ended up, by the time they found us, they only had the 9 months left because they had an air date. And it was going out on CBS television in the States, and they'd booked 2 one-hour slots on a Sunday night and a Monday night. And it was sponsored by Kraft, who had agreed to put it out without any commercials. So the only breaks in it were station IDs, which they have to do legally in the States. At least they did in those days. So we had to do this in these 2 halves. We had the air date, and you couldn't change it. And the reason it was done that way is because Kraft were doing a reading program, encouraging kids to read books rather than watch television. And so what they did with this, they tied in with the publishers, and they supplied copies of the books to schools all over America, a teaching aid. And then the idea was that the kids would read the book, watch the program. So on Monday, they go into school. Teacher would give them something to write about. What was different from the book to this bit, and then same thing on the next night. And it was incredibly successful. One of our animators in Los Angeles, his wife is a teacher, and she says the first time she ever got her kids to read a book, any time she'd been teaching. So it was great. So it really worked well, as far as I know. And but anyway, that was the reason for all the time constraints. You just could not go out and get those slots again. The original book was illustrated, but there were book illustrations, and sometimes it's just impossible to take those and make them move. It was very difficult. And so, if they haven't been designed for that. And so we went out and just designed, we got a designer in, Al Sheehan, who's a really good designer. And he did some incredibly off-the-wall things, which are on the DVD, and which we loved. And everybody said, "Oh, that's fine." We went to the copyright owners, and they hated them. And so we had to redesign. And then, in fact, within that context, when I was, because I started animating on it in London to set the style. And I'd animated on the first section, about 2 minutes when the word came down that the copyright holders didn't like the kids, the designs of the kids. And so we had to redesign them. And then they called up and said, and we also don't like the voices. So we had to re-record them. And so that lost us about 5 weeks, because it's not just doing a drawing of a character. You have to draw the character, do a model sheet, get this disseminated to everybody involved, and so just a nightmare. But we managed to get over it. I was going to Barcelona every other week during the thing. I was also going to LA, and I was carrying things back and forth. This is before email, before fax machines. So if you wanted to send a drawing, you had to get it there physically. And so you either had to get an air freight company. And air freight companies, they didn't have couriers in those days. I mean, you had to pay somebody to actually fly to get something there overnight. So I was doing that, and my dad was doing that, and Dave Connell was doing that. And there are people in the studio in Barcelona who were doing that. And that's a problem, because everything worked fine between all of us. The other studio, which was TV Cartoons in London, they, of course, because they were next door, we didn't bother to see them. We just assumed that osmosis, it would work, that they would understand everything we had. So kind of funny, next door was a big problem with communication, but not the overseas bits. For America, we had to cast American voices. And back then, which was 79, there were 78, there was a whole series of American schools in London. And I went to all of them and interviewed all these kids or auditioned them, and found a family. Perfect. There were 5 of them. So we cast 4 kids, and they were absolutely wonderful. And they treated each other just like brothers and sisters. 2 boys and 2 girls, and they would argue with each other. I just let them go when we were recording. They were wonderful. And those are the voices that the Americans didn't like. They thought they were too strident, or maybe too honest, or too real. And so they wanted a bit more stylized. So we went in, we had to recast them all. But we kept the boy, was the one that was original. Sorry, the youngest one, Edmund. He's the voice that we kept. All the adults were English. But when it went out here, they recast them again. The only one they kept was Stephen Thorne, who did Aslan, his voice. I think he was the only English voice that they kept. And they changed them all. Yes, we won an Emmy. I've got it somewhere. I should have brought it with me. But yes, we won an Emmy on it, and it had all kinds of awards all over the place. I don't know what they all were. I just produced it. They don't tell me these things. I assume the people in Atlanta and in New York have all those things. Well, I haven't seen it. I imagine it's going to be wonderful, but I mean, I have to remember when we did this, nobody had computers. There was no 3D animation going on unless it was puppets. And in order to get animals talking, etc., it was very difficult unless you did like they did in The Wizard of Oz. And so, the obvious way to do this was in animation, 2D. And so that's why we did it this way. Now, of course, you would approach it in a different way. But that was, then, there was no choice. Right at the end of the film, there's a whole sequence when the kids go back through the woods and back to England. Eddie Radich, who was the animation director of that sequence, thought, well, we don't have time to actually animate this properly. So he went out with a little Super 8 camera and shot a bunch of horses in a field and got people to ride them around and do that. And they rotoscoped the horses. So they got the action right. because it's very hard to animate a four-legged character, and horses are difficult, and we just didn't have time to teach people. And so we went out and did it that way. And so it has a slightly different feel, that one section where was the hunt for the white stag. But I mean, but it worked really well. And Eddie was really good because he stylized it. He didn't actually take the live action and use that. He stylized it quite a bit, and it looks really good. And if you watch it carefully, you almost believe it's a real horse sometimes, and the stag running. But that's the closest thing we ever got to CGI. There's so much of the CGI, the 3D out there, that I think it's becoming kind of like wallpaper. Well, rather like 2D animation became. People just got tired of it. I was talking with somebody recently, and they were saying that, particularly with little kids programming, like preschools, where it's a watch with mother or father or whatever, the family watches programs together, that the adults are very resistant to 3D. And so a lot of them are going back to 2D productions. But back then, we didn't have any choice.